Dear friends, dear family, and of course, dear seething freaks that stalk me from Twitter, welcome to Marchese Daily, where we do a little bit of political and sociocultural analysis through the lens of based therapy, based psychoanalysis, and the Marchese mentality to arm you with some examples, some frameworks, some F of X's that will make your life a little bit easier, or more accurately, your life more on the path to fulfillment through keeping your eyes on the prize. I'll work on that intro. I'll work on that element there. So today's topics, we're going to go a little bit over the recent developments in the Gaza war, the Ukraine war, and the like, and what that intimates for the United States and our current state of affairs, as well as this SNAP stuff. We all know what the answer is to the SNAP stuff, right? It's just lazy babies who don't want to get a job. So I felt it a little bit trite to cover that, but perhaps I could give a little bit deeper of a rooted element into, or insight into, why they're so fucking entitled about SNAP and every psychodynamic structure associated. I have a bunch of ideas here that I'm not too sure if any of them are going to go the full length of the show, so I just sort of put here that I have a myriad of ideas or psychoanalyses. So before we begin, Marchese Maxers, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, retweet. Don't just watch, okay? Like, subscribe, retweet. And I think I also have super chats open now, entropystream.live/Marchese Methods. And we'll give that a try. I'll see if I can have that set up at the end here if anybody sends me a super chat. I don't know if I'm big enough yet that people will even want to send me super chats. So I just had to talk about another thing. This is actually a good analysis, too, of some interactions I had throughout the week. So the other day, a friend of mine on here, at Trashcan Man or something like that, we were joking around about like Christianity, and specifically how there's this class of characters or Protestant types who, go, well, if my wife is another race and Christian, I would pick that over non-Christian of the same race. And it's like, okay, which one of those things can you change and which one of those things can you not change? Did we forget the part that you can become Christian? Isn't that kind of like the whole point, the whole part of being Christian, is that we want everyone to give their life over to Jesus and to accept Jesus and accept that he is God, that he is real, that he is true, and everything about him is true, and his word is true. So can't we just, we could still marry within our race? And not that I'm too much, I should say I am like rooted in the truth and understanding of the racial dynamics and everything, but it's not one of my major topics insofar as, making like it a whole shtick, a whole big analysis. It's just simple. You're white, you're European, and this goes for other races too. There's not this linearity to your genes. It's not like you get 50% of the best genes one way and 50% of the best genes the other way. There is a way that genes express when they are alike that's different than from when they're not alike, as well as all of these like health consequential arguments and all that. But nevertheless, so my buddy was joking that his white wife, despite not being Christian, she exudes the characteristics of a Christian more than she even really knows. So I just made the joke. I was like, white excellence. And a guy who I had positive interactions with, not to make this like a drama thing. I wasn't really going to go over this in that sense. I didn't want to blow up his spot. He seemed like an okay guy. And I still really don't consider this like a fight per se. But he replies to that and he was like, Jesus was most likely brown, dude. Or olive or something like that. And are we really still doing this? First of all, why does that point even have to be made? You only feel the need to make that point if you fucking hate white people. Let's be real. You only feel the need to bring that up in a topic that didn't really relate to that. The joke was that it's white excellence to be a Christian without really knowing it. That tells you that there's something innate to white people that makes them align with Christianity. So the joke there, so the white excellence part there is a joke or a testament to, I forgot to start the space. I'm going to get this right one day. Okay. Record space. Let me copy the title of this stream here. And then now let me open up the mic, turn on the mic. It goes to my microphone here instead of my laptop microphone. All right, we're good. So if you hop into the space, you know how it goes. Towards the end, I will open it up and everything. So if I don't see you in the space at the moment, it's because I got to keep everything else up. So anyway, why do we even have to argue this? What's the own here? This type of stuff. The own is, oh, he's not white and therefore what? Whiteness isn't Christian or something like that, or, oh, well, since God is like Middle Eastern brown or something, God incarnate is Middle Eastern or brown, therefore their genetics are superior to that of whites or something, or is that supposed to imply that there is no genetic differences between white people and other people somehow now? So anyway, so the conversation goes on. It's like, first of all, this is just like a low IQ heuristic, this idea. Middle Eastern, therefore brown. And it's like, did people just never travel 2,000 years ago? Was there no such thing as travel 2,000 years ago, riding horseback throughout areas? What's more, that's actually not how the Middle Eastern demographics work. You remember the Caucasus Mountains? Remember Caucasians who come from the Caucasus Mountains? That's not exactly a continent away from the Middle East or the Holy Land. You also have a lot of modern-day Iranians having genetic lineage from, the Persian genetic lineage that amounts to a white look, a white skin. Now, if you were to construct the argument and say, well, he may have appeared white or fair-skinned, whatever the terminology is, but, he wasn't necessarily European white. Well, okay, sure, that's a separate constructed argument. But this stuff about the fact that you have to make it about the white skin more than anybody who's like pro-white does implies that you unironically are preoccupied with skin color. And this guy proclaimed he was white, but it's like this level of preoccupation with whiteness and making the point that Jesus was brown is most certainly not like a white behavior. Or at the very least, you're like really infected with communist, anti-white hatred of the modern day. And I also made the joke, and it's like, okay, well, how is he brown but also Jewish? Aren't modern day Jews like white-skinned, white-looking? Isn't that kind of like the whole shtick of Jews, is that they were able to blend in with Europeans all the way back until 2,000 years ago? So it's like, which is it? Is he brown or is he ethnically Jewish? You can't have both, so you got to do this. The Jewish argument is so ridiculous too. Yeah, being of the tribe of Judea and in that land, it doesn't necessarily imply you're the same as like the modern day Jewish people and the Jewish ethnocentrism, whatever. So anyway, and I just made these points, and of course it's, you're hateful. What about this implies that somebody is hateful? To say that somebody is hateful is to say that they have an irrational anger towards the existence of somebody else for no reason other than their existence. So how does this imply hatred? Well, if you're talking about this stuff and the differences and all of that, that necessarily implies you think that one is better than the other. No, it doesn't. You think that because you have a materialistic worldview. You could only think any person is better than another in that fashion if you have a materialistic worldview wherein you attach people's value to tangibles or measurables like IQ, like how good they are at XYZ. That's not real, and no Christian authentically believes that. There's Christians who, sound like they come close to that and all of that, but we're called upon to understand that everyone has equal value before God, and that equal value doesn't mean there's no differences in capabilities and the like, but that equal value means you have an equal value of your identity and soul and life force, Holy Spirit life force within you before God. So now, you can think that you are better than other people at things. You can think that your measured IQ or whatever is higher or lower than other people's. Now, to group and to do like the thing of all this, all that, we really got to get past too. When we talk in generalities, and I know this is trite, but when we talk in generalities, we really got to get past this idea that leads to this unfair, mean judgment, this meanness that is unfair judgment to people who don't fall within that average. For example, I see people online making fun of like the gym bro stuff, the gym bro types. Now, if I identified myself with that gym bro archetype, then I would take offense. But I know that I fall outside that category, outside that average, despite being a part of the collective of gym bros, I guess you could say. So I don't take offense. I don't get mad at that type of thing. I say they're right. I criticize the average gym bro, as a matter of fact, with their classical cope theory and their gay little dances. You know, the posing stuff, they do like that stupid stuff. I always resented that. I always thought that was insufferable and pretentious. So anyway, you could only think of this hateful stuff, or you could only think of white identity as hateful if you're the one who thinks that whites are superior to others because you have a quantified, tangible, materialistic worldview or a materialistic understanding of worldview. What's more, you also are preoccupied by that if you worship compassion, if you don't actually worship God, if you worship compassion, if you worship this modern day compassion at all costs and this don't be mean at all costs, like that's your God, which is wrong. We can't just be outright jerks and the like, but we can't sacrifice truth to spare feelings. And I know this is like super gay, trite stuff from like 2016. Facts don't care about your feelings. Now, the grand irony is that whenever I have these discussions, I just lay out the points, and people always do this meme of reducing it to just like ego battles of who's better or who's superior or all of that. And they'll, Redditor types, these Redditor midwit types will express that through these like short, quippy, feel-good things to say that give this sense of this condescending stuff that feel good and make you feel good to say, this condescending one-liners of like, you're just not going to get it, that type of stuff. And you have to do that if you feel you are being beaten. When you feel inferior, and I'm not even trying to make I beat you or anything, but when you feel inferior because you are losing, and then you attach your value to whether or not you win or whether or not you're correct in an argument or something, you now feel inferior. And then once you feel inferior, you have to assert superiority, but because you can't do that directly because you don't have the skill or the wherewithal or just the background to be able to contend with the arguments, you have to do this gay little thing of trying to assert superiority in some other way, and most often it's through these tangibles. And then, of course, the culmination in whenever I argue with these types is they get all huffy and puffy at the end, and then they go, this, that, the other thing. It's like, that's by definition cowardice. Oh, I'm uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable now with this threat to my schema of attaching my value to XYZ thing that you've deconstructed, and now I'm in the realm of the unknown. I'm in the realm of unknown, which has an inherent fear of just danger in and of itself, the danger of feeling inadequate, feeling less than, and the danger of having to contend with one's actual identity, one's actual personality that in the cases of these people is undeveloped, unsophisticated, and not in alignment with their actual ideal vision for themselves. And so there's the inherent danger in that, and there's this emulated danger of being in the unknown. I think I talked about this one of our previous shows. And the inherent danger in the unknown is that when there's danger, you cannot, but you're unfamiliar, you cannot adequately prepare yourself for said danger. You could think of it as the dark, right? Darkness. We are afraid of the darkness because we can't gather the visual intel to know what the threat is and then, go through the programs of how to defend ourselves against such a threat. So it was disappointing. This guy was like a cool guy that I interacted with quite a bit. I tried to encourage him, but, people really got to get past this idea of attaching their value or attaching their sense of selves to like these measurables, quantifiables, and comparisons. I know that's also trite, but I guess it needs to be said. I guess it needs to be broadcast quite a bit. People don't really feel it in their hearts. They don't understand it. And I think ultimately that amounts to the value proposition that we always talk about, valuing transcendence, valuing truth in and of itself. I'm never afraid of this type of thing because I don't feel like I'm going to be inadequate if somebody proves me wrong per se. And I can feel as I'm saying this, if I have like a faggy stalker type that, people do this thing of projecting ego on me, I guess because I'm like a gym person or something. My profile picture is me in the gym right there or something. And so I could feel like if there's some faggy loser stalker that watches this and has seen my spaces and the like, they'll dig through their little whatever and try to come up with some bullshit rationale as to, you're actually like that. And even if so, it's like, okay, and so what are you trying to say? That I have feelings, I guess? And what is that supposed to say? That I'm weak or something? Okay, why do you then feel the need to suggest or to conclude or to QED that I'm weak in some fashion? So I'm never afraid of this type of stuff, and you'll see along the lines here when I have my real life friends on these spaces. We have our lengthy history of being friends and goofing off and talking about these things, and so it's always funny. It always winds up being if somebody says something that is an accurate flaw in my reasoning or something like that. You know what I always do? This funny thing of like, shut up, you're lying, shut up, that's bro. Me and my buddy from the other few spaces here have done that quite a bit. Also, for many years, my Army buddies in the 2020 to 2023, there was an explosion of lifting classical cope theory that amounted to essentially what I always talk about. Actually, it's optimized to work out 3 times a week for 20 minutes because this, that, the other thing. Dude, you actually have to eat. You got to eat. So we would always elaborate and analyze the classical cope theory of that. But we would go get ice cream. We would go get smoothies or something. We would go, our favorite one was going to this Vietnamese pho place. I say pho because most people don't know that's how it's pronounced, but it's like, it's Vietnamese noodle soup essentially. And so we would always go and we would get the boba tea, the boba smoothies that were totally like coon-brained. Eating like that was coon-brained, and it was especially exacerbated this sensation because it was, the sound you make when you slurp soup. So we would be like, yeah, dude, I'm just like so based and red-pilled in fitness and stuff, and I'm like such a total alpha. I'm not a pussy beholden to my feelings. Then it's like slurp. And all of that was to make fun of ourselves. Or we would get like tired or sleepy at like 6:30 p.m. We'd be like, yeah, dude, I'm such a based alpha. I'm such a based masculine high energy alpha high T. And then we'd like make like we're falling asleep. So all of this is to say, like, fucking relax. Nothing happens. You don't risk actually anything. You could only think or feel that you risk anything by being wrong or being proven in some way a little bit inconsistent. if you think that that matters, if you think that there's a materialism to that, if you hinge your value on that type of stuff. So anyway, that's a long sort of intro to, but as always, you sort of tune in for these psychological insights and all of that. So I'll give a brief overview of my thoughts on the political stuff. So, of fucking course, they just had to break the ceasefire. More so, they're just doing the most insufferable, terrible things. And we talked about one of the last few times, essentially, that is to keep the momentum of their campaign, because if that momentum dies down, their regime's going to jail. I think you might have seen that the International Criminal Court is now ruling them as committing war crimes and the like, which, we have like this history of that quite a bit as well. And so I would just say the main point is that fundamentally this conflict will not rest, because these two goals of a Palestinian state and regional hegemony like ultimately are incompatible. They're mutually exclusive. There's no way for this to resolve in some middle ground unless we start thinking outside the box, like Israel perhaps being in Madagascar or something like that. So I can't remember which historical figure came up with that idea. Joking about all of that. So, and of course, the United States really is just doing its part of half-assing and an inability to restrain Israel on this stuff because of all the usual level 1, red pill 101 stuff, the Israel lobby, foreign influence, Zionist and non-Zionist tech billionaires or financial billionaires. Which, why would you suppose that is? There's that many of you might have heard of what we call Jewish factionalism. There is a Jewish right wing and left wing, but that left wing has a goal for the Jewish people that is, well, if everyone's multicultural and everyone is anti-identity and all of that stuff, we can sort of blend in. And that's one stratagem. The other stratagem essentially is we need a state of our own, an ethno-state of our own, where we have our own sovereignty. And on some level, fair enough. That's their group. That's what they feel they need to do, either which way. The problem is it's not exactly always aligned to our interests. The left-wing Jewishness, Jewery, as academics use that term, by the way. That's not a jerk term. Some people think that's a jerk term. The problem is, well, that subverts our identity. That subverts our sovereignty. If the United States in particular is so turbo multicultural and turbo anti-identity. And then the other one subverts our interests because the Israeli state uses the United States to facilitate its interests. So that is the problem of it with the United States. And you might say, oh, okay, well, then there's not like a Jewish monolith or anything of the like. But you have to understand they're identitarian, they're identity conscious. And in a way, fair enough. They have their own ethno identity. There's the Talmudic stuff that's rather crass and disrespectful and pretentious and arrogant. But nevertheless, they have their identity. And so with their precipitating history and their ideas about how they were kicked out of Europe and all of the like, they come together. They band together. They value that together. They are tribalistic. They value their identity and thus come together and work together. And anything that resembles some sort of factionalism, you could think of more so as like a family dispute. So that is that element, and any day now the United States is going to get involved because the last step in this hegemonic goal is one of toppling the Iranian regime. They can't do that by themselves, so they need the United States. The United States does have an interest in this by way of Iran not nuclearizing. And I think I said one of the last few times, Iran needs not nuclearization we don't need them to proliferate. That's not because that puts them on parity with the other nuclear powers, and then that just necessarily erodes our security a little bit because we don't have any power leverage over them. But in some way, in some fashion, you almost wonder perhaps that would serve as a check on Israel, as a matter of fact, and that would actually give us an out of the region in an ironic twist. And why do we need out of that region? Why do we need out of this Ukraine stuff, this Ukraine war? Well, that is because we're waging all these wars. We're in like a World War III, essentially. We're waging all these wars, and it's pursuant to what? Pursuant to affairs that barely, hardly affect us, just territory gains and this type of nonsense. Especially with the Middle East. In the Middle East, as a matter of fact, if we want a mosaic of Arab states there, because they balance each other out. If one country, one peoples control that region, they control the Suez Canal, they control the ports, they control the trade routes, and they control the oil. So if one does that, they can use that as leverage across the rest of the world, in particular against us. If there's a mosaic of them, if one of them tries using that as leverage, well, we could go to the other one who won't use it as leverage. So it's pursuant to nothing. And the major problem of that is we're focusing on retarded stuff. Our country, the homeland, is a disaster. It's a disaster culturally. It's a disaster economically. Relating to the war efforts here, the economic biggest problem is that we're not industrial. We don't manufacture anything real tangible, any tangible assets anymore. We outsourced all of that in favor of capital, in favor of financiers. And you have to understand that that is the inevitable consequence of, a overly done capitalism. We thought it was just like crony capitalism or something. And I hate hearing myself saying the word capitalism because you sound like such a faggot, such a libtard faggot type that really just resents capitalism because they're jealous of people who get rich essentially, and they resent the idea that they have to put out effort commensurate to what they want to get out of such effort. They're just like insentient lizard brain babies who want to optimize energy by getting it all for nothing. And if you zoom out of like a societal structure, like that level of retardation, while it most certainly is a part of our instinct to go as far as possible into that energy optimization, it doesn't make sense. It's literally retarded. And you could just zoom out to what if we're all hunter-gatherers? If we're all hunter-gatherers, the simplest version, the simplest demonstration of this is that if you are an adult in the hunter-gatherer tribe, but you don't hunt, two things happen is that you don't provide for others and others have to provide for you. So you've doubled the load upon somebody else. You've made somebody else do the work of two people for one. And I know this is super trite, but it's worth mentioning as I speak here. So it's gay and retarded, and it just takes from other people. And, why do you want that? Like, that's another symptom of this worship of hedonism, this worship of globo homo, lizard brain, survival instinct, I'm going to die if I don't optimize my energy instinct. We got to grow up. We got to get past that. Part of the gift of being a human is the free agency, the free will, agency, transcendence capability that we're gifted with by God. And so anyway, that's libtardisms and their resentment for capitalism. So I'm not that, but necessarily if you leave it completely freely open, this is the inevitable consequence. Necessarily, it's the proven, observable, I guess empirical, I hate that, consequence. This is what happened in the face of this endless gay capitalism. That doesn't mean I'm not a capitalist. I just think we need something to stop this type of stuff of financiers moving money around like gay faggots and outsourcing to China, outsourcing industry to other places where it's cheaper, to just funnel more money upwards. And then you have all of the downstream consequences of the job problem, the immigrant problem, etc. And so we don't industrialize anymore. Now, what's the problem with that? The problem is that we may look like we're prosperous because we have a GDP and all of that, but it's all services. It's all fake. It's intangible. It's not assets. It's just a GDP of money moving around. So all of that's to say the real problem of wars and waging international wars and getting involved in foreign affairs is that we don't have industry. We don't have a state capable of wielding any sort of influence or power meaningfully because it's hollow. It's hollow. It's empty. We have this half-baked military that really does not have anywhere near enough equipment to challenge our peers. And then everyone who's in the military knows, or who has ever had any experience in the military knows, that they are not subject to high standards in any meaningful way. And I'm not just talking about the hecklin' physical fitness standards. I might have told the story sometimes about how these mediocrities who don't fucking make any meaningful effort to get to the fucking gym themselves would complain about how there are fat soldiers. It's like, your daily habits are no different than that of that person. So I think I've already mentioned that, so I won't go too deep into that. We got to get to some of our psychology here, checking the time. And so where's I going with that? Industry. Oh, military standards. They also don't have standards for like competence, actually. Part of the appeal of the military is that if you're incompetent, you'll have a job. They let in some real fucktards in the military, and a lot of them remain fucktards their whole life in the military. So that's just an aside about our capacity to challenge our peers, particularly China and Russia. So that's all cooked. We're cooked. We need to industrialize. And tariffs were supposed to be a part of that industrialization. I hosted a space a while back, so I'll give a brief point on tariffs. This stuff about, well, they're going to increase costs. It's like, okay, and to what level? If costs increase 20% or something, that's only a problem if you're really just like totally destitute. If you're like a total proletariat, and you're already kind of cooked regardless if you're that level of proletariat. Also, what a remarkable, instructive example of being a low IQ, insentient, Coomer, feelsy brain. That might not feel good because in the immediate future, it doesn't feel good. In the immediate future, we have heightened costs. But what happens? Manufacturing gets put on shore. When it's put on shore, yeah, we have to pay American workers and all of that, but there's also investment to that. There's also systemic setup to that. They will try to reduce their costs by making things more efficient and the like. And so, naturally, we will have let me check on the space here. We have one listener, but listening privately. Okay. I just have to check because last time I didn't have the mic on and everything. Let me check my messages here, actually, just in case. Okay. Sorry, I do these pauses here. So, crazy fucking concept, but we can, grow up and suffer a little bit in the immediate future for the later and greater consequence. So, that's all the wars and how it relates to the United States and industry. Maybe I'll go over Snap real quick. So, I'll try to keep this part quick, and maybe I'll get to one of my analyses that I want to do here about culture and gay classical cope theory. So the Snap stuff just is still coming up in the news. I keep seeing it across my timeline and everything, so perhaps I'll have something to say to it. Now, of course, the point about how they're just lazy babies and they don't want to work is trite, and there is an insentient lizard brain element to that, but there's also a deep infection of a value proposition of those feelings, and the meaning of life is feeling good and not feeling bad. And the expression of that through Snap is this sort of entitlement, this sort of presumption, well, actually, there's a deeper element to this presumption that things are out of their control, essentially. And things are out of their control when they project that outwards, when inwards they are used to or enslaved by that impulse and feelings. And so they think necessarily that it's outside of their control because the mandates of their id are necessarily to be followed. It is necessary to be followed to them to try not to work and everything. It's a value proposition, but it's also like a biophysiological non-synapse, or in the absence of a synapse that produces the thought that you do not belong to that. You don't have to belong to that. It's the presumption that the only possible way to exist, live, facilitate life is through subordination to that pleasure principle. It is the presumption that that is the power. That power is completely outside of you. You do not have the agency to overcome that. And so this sort of manifests as like, you might have heard the lines of, I didn't ask to be born. They think that they since their life doesn't belong to them, or their life was given to them without them asking, they think that it's necessarily the responsibility of everybody else to facilitate their life since they brought it into this world. And no, actually, your life belongs to you. It belongs to God as well, but it belongs to you. He has given it to you to do something with it, and you are taking from the life of others when you want to freeload, I suppose. So I'm going to have to think a little bit more on how to hone in on that point about they project power outwards and they presume that things are outside of their control because they don't understand, or they don't have the synapses to produce the thought of the capability of transcending impulse, pleasure, and so on. They see that as more powerful than themselves. They see that as insurmountable. So, all right, so I have a couple of bookmarks here about some ideas about some stuff here. Let's see. What's one that I can knock out real quick? The porn addiction stuff is, I think this one's a good one. So there was this study or something, survey, that said that 70% of women believe it's always morally wrong for married men to have an affair, but only 56% believe it's always morally wrong for women to have an affair. 61% of men say it is always morally wrong for married men to have an affair, and 53% it's always morally wrong for married women. Why do you think that is? Shouldn't it be viewed as equally morally wrong? Yeah. So this is that subordination. This is that feelings, specifically my feelings, are the supreme teleology, the supreme purpose of life. And it's morally wrong for married men to have an affair according to women because it hurts them and it hurts their feelings. But 56%, which tells you that 56% are at least somewhat sentient, believe it's always, so that means that 40-something percent, 44%, give me LOL, believe it's always morally wrong for women to have an affair. So this is everything that has to do with that rationalization stuff, that justification stuff, that victim hierarchy as well. If an offense was enacted upon them by the male, they think they have a right to rectify that offense. And if the offense is to their feelings, the rectification is making themselves feel better. And this also amounts to a lot of classical cope theory stuff about taking any excuse to please yourself, because really an affair, why do we need this actually? As a matter of fact, this relates to, there was this other part. This conversation amounts to this conversation about women denying sex to their husband and all of that. Now, retards are commenting, oh, well, that's why you need multiple wives. And it's like, No, that's just your convenient excuse, and that is a huge symptomatic problem of, first of all, being a coon brain. Second of all, you married a fucking retard. You married a retarded woman. And third of all, you still are not even beholden to sex, but beholden to the affection and value bestowed unto you by women through sex. That's all that excuses, that's all that reduces to. And the women are particularly offended by this whole conversation because they see themselves as having no choice. The endless goonette dilemma is that the alpha Chad bro type is attractive, is sexy, and therefore when they start some kind of relationship with him, they have no problem with this sex stuff. They almost feel like they can't help themselves but have sex with that guy, as evident in just how they relate to them, as evident in their complaint of, oh, he's using me, and oh, blah, 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 I just love him, and that type of thing. That just means she just can't help herself with being sexually attracted to him enough to give her sexuality over to him. And embedded in this too, I don't know if I said this earlier, but embedded in this, let's not pretend that sex is something given to men by women. In this psychological, transactional way, sometimes a little bit, but they get sex from men out of that. And sex is good for everybody in this pleasure coomery way. It's only not good if this is about ego transactionalism to you, if this is about sex meaning something insofar as who you have sex with implies something about your sexual value or implies something about your value as a person, a man or a woman. And so anyway, women see this dichotomy as inescapable. This dichotomy of the alpha Chad and so on that treats them like shit. And that's because the goonette dilemma has this foundational problem of, with their feelings as the barometer, which stem from a survival instinct of feelings as the way to go, to make decisions, to inform themselves on facilitating life, because it is much faster and easier to do that than to analyze and rationalize and all of that, because physically they don't have the physical capacity to buy themselves the time or physical capacity to withstand the time. The time of danger, the time between them and the danger meeting them. And so they use this feelings heuristic, and then they use, and that exacerbates or that follows or that develops further into using their feelings to inform how they relate to men. And so they falsely linearize it. They linearize it to say, well, more feelings and more intense feelings equals more attractive or more masculine. So that's what they rely on. Now, the problem is that boisterous alpha tough guys or faux tough guys, faux masculine types who are just look good or something and they're cocky, they are masquerading masculinity by putting on the act, by putting on the show, and women fall for it because it spikes their emotions. Either which way, that tells them excitement, and excitement is that barometer. And so they get pissed off, and then eventually they realize that there's two elements to their attraction: the direct attraction in and of itself, and then the safety element of attraction. So now the direct attraction and excitement, since they only understand masculinity through that boisterous male, they can't pick up on masculinity or the combination of masculinity and that is alpha, but also psychosocially safe in the sense that he's not like a pussy, but that he's disciplined, he's orderly, and he's got it all on track, but simultaneously still alpha. They don't understand that much more authentic and strong masculinity comes from not being such a insentient coon brain, enslaved to impulse. And so they resort to the conclusion that you can either be enamored with an attractive guy or you have to go with a safe guy. And I'll say real quick, They also are conflicted in the safety of when it's a boisterous retard like that, inevitably they're sexual coon brains and they're led by the nose by their feelings and impulses. And thus that provokes the sensation of unsafety, especially ego transactional safety, because they feel that he can and will leave the first chance he gets, or he will invest in other women in some fashion. And so finally, and I know this is probably pretty trite for some of us, but I'll just keep going. I'll also try to, 2 days in a row, psychoanalysis kind of like about women, so I'll try not to do that so much. But this really sort of applies to everybody. It's just the unique issue of women is that they are more beholden to their feelings in this case, and they are more prominently complaining about this, I guess. So anyway, so this safety guy, there's this safety guy, the beta or whatever, that they're not attracted to. They bargain and they say, well, I can get the safety sensation that's not particularly exciting, but it's still some vague, visceral, not as important attraction, and more importantly, not real, authentic safety attraction, because they resent these types. Some of them think that when they get married to these types, they can nudge him to be better, nudge him to be alpha in some fashion, to be exciting in some fashion. But it's one of those like women foy to goldfish things where it's, I feel this way right here, right now, so I'm going to provoke him, I'm going to antagonize him, I'm going to try to get him to be more alpha or something. But when he does, the new feeling prompts of, well, now that turns me off because he's just sort of doing it to get laid. He's doing it because there's a sex consequence. It's not like an authentic masculine pursuit. So they resent these guys. They resent that they're sort of stuck with them. And so they do the best they can. Now, there's also a optimization of the deal instinct where they want to get the most out of him for the least amount of sex. When you're endlessly materialistic, egotistical, and in this realm of transaction, this realm of ego, external transaction, and all of that as a informant for your sense of self, self-esteem, fulfillment, you're going to operate this way. And men do this too. This is the classic element of men getting sex from women without giving back some sort of commitment, emotionality, vulnerability, investment, pair bonding. And so women do this too. Of course, they're just excused from it in the modern day, because they now have this collective unconscious of we all want to come together and optimize our energy. And then there's the proliferation of the internet and mass media that makes them feel enabled to do so by their access to men. But I'll try not to get off track with that. And so they try to have as little sex as possible for the most safety as possible, let's say. There's that optimization of energy playing a role too. So now all of this amounts to that when there's this conversation about the Bible and the sexual mandates and the like, essentially they feel disgusted that it's being demanded upon them in some fashion, because it's disgusting to them that a beta male that they're not attracted to, it's disgusting to them to have to, or to give that to somebody they're not attracted to. And that disgust provokes or prompts from the instinct to optimize their reproduction. And, to optimize their reproduction. And the disgust is in that they will be impregnated, even if that's not actually happening. Our brain will read it this way. They will find it disgusting to be impregnated by an unattractive male, because unattractive means essentially attraction versus unattraction means ability for the child to survive and ability to make survive of themselves, of their genes in the future, in their adulthood, as well as the ability to raise that child, to make that child, keep that child alive, essentially, until they can keep themselves alive. So they're really disgusted with this topic, and they're disgusted with this idea of just doing it anyway because they're not attracted to him. And it has nothing to do with this idea of this moral fagging about, oh, well, it's wrong to confer that upon their freedom and to impose that upon their sovereignty. And so ultimately it reduces to they're not attracted to those husbands, and they don't see a way out because they see it either as boisterous retard or safe pussy. So their job essentially has to be reconciling their sentience and understanding the expression of masculinity that's not exclusively through heuristics like how excited they make them, a false excitement anyway, just novelty, stimulus, excitement, and a false expression of masculinity that is he gets laid. Now, most certainly, other women desiring serves as a functional good heuristic, and that's just how that goes. That's never really going away per se. But other women desiring him, if he has an authentic, stronger expression of masculinity, he doesn't indulge in that. But him not indulging in that falsely conflates as him not having access to women at all, because the presumption is that if you have access to women, you're going to indulge in it. So the authentic masculine, the task for them is to investigate and search for authentic masculinity that doesn't express as excitement, but express as transcendence, fulfillment, pursuit, truth, discipline, which isn't going to be exciting in a way, but it's going to bring peace, and it's going to bring forth joy and happiness in fulfilling of the needs. So that is this disgust amongst women to giving, quote unquote, giving sex to their husband. And as if it takes something from them too. Women have this problem of thinking there's this psychological transaction of women feeling like sex takes something from them. It's like the female castration anxiety. It takes something from them. In a way, they read it as it takes their sovereignty, because when a man has sex with a woman, even without the intention of impregnation, the brain reads that as impregnation. And so when the brain reads that as impregnation, that baby belongs to him, and in a way that transmutes to her entire body, and being belongs to him. And if you have if women have this particular penis envy topic that I've been discussing, it exacerbates the sensation of inferiority to not only have no adherence to their moral authority, provoking sensations of guilt, and which then in not being a good person, which necessarily transmutes to inferiority, but it exacerbates this in feeling of inferiority to belong to somebody, especially if that person is a male who ostensibly has this easier time transcending impulses and this ostensible easier time becoming of free will, of agency, of transcendence. So let me check in here. Been going on for 50 minutes. I do feel like I have a lot more of stuff to say here. Nobody's in the space at the moment, so I could keep going. Let's see what else provokes some thoughts here. I suppose here's a good one. This might be a little long, so bear with me here. I'll try to wrap this up. My famous mini essay, The Return to Skinny. So for those of you who have yet to read that, you could search under my tweets, return spelled RETVRN. There's a lot of this gender dynamic stuff amounts to power, and power, this need and this obsession and compulsion with power amidst the genders functions in two fashions. Firstly, many people just feel powerless. As explained, many people feel powerless because they are beholden to and subordinate to feelings, pleasure, principle, id. And so that has power over them that they are adhering to, that they are subordinating to, listening to. So they feel powerless because they don't belong to themselves, but their superego imposes this guilt, imposes this disgust with themselves, imposes inferiority, and further exacerbating the sense of powerlessness, inferiority upon them, rather than address the source of that, which is indiscipline, lack of discipline, because that would entail giving up their pleasures and all of that. And in conjunction with valuing feelings in and of itself, that's the value proposition, that's the telos of life, they more so want to just address the negative feeling of inferiority, the negative feeling of guilt. And so one of the expressions of this is we also feel that when we are vulnerable to the opposite sex, that necessarily implies power. They have power over us. They have the ability to hurt us or to leverage something against us pursuant to their interests. And so we resent this, and men particularly resent this because everyone likes power and feels the need to have power, but the relationship between power and masculinity is that power implies the ability to provide and protect. Power implies a bunch of other things and all of that, but in this hunter-gatherer element, in this deep survival instinct element, power implies that you're able to provide and protect. Protection, especially because if you have power, you're less vulnerable, and if you're not so vulnerable, you can't get hurt, and if you can't get hurt, pain is not going to be inflicted upon you, or danger or the ending of your life won't inflict upon you, and therefore that necessarily means you are linearly more capable of warding off inflictions upon the life of you and your children, wife, family, and so on. And so it has a special relationship with men. And there are certain ways that power expresses as well, bigness versus littleness. So now, what is the emulation of this power problem? There's this trend amongst rightoids, and this is instructive as to how most of the right wing has this significant problem with. And I see some more people jumping on here. Real quick, I have a poll up on my Twitter as to when I should start the show. I want people here live. You could watch the recording, of course, but I want to have live in case people will just have a moment where they want to jump in on the panel thereafter and have something to say. So I have a poll on my Twitter. What time should I start the show? Go ahead and vote in on it. The options are 7, 7:30, and 8. The latest I could go in the morning is 8 because I got other things to do throughout the day and work and stuff. So now, anyway, return to skinny. And I saw this because this exact structure is resembled in this stuff about Sabrina Carpenter actually isn't attractive. You know, it's a similar structure, and I'll elucidate what the difference is, though. Similar structure, but not quite the same. So anyway, return to skinny. So men have this resentment to the power of that female attraction has over them. Their want and desire and need from women for sex. It's deep in that we need them to reproduce successfully. You cannot get around it. Women have that leverage upon men, and we have certain leverages upon them. Ultimately, we have more leverage upon them. Some people try to construct the argument about how men facilitate society, and all of that is technically, in a way, in theory, pursuant to bettering the lives of women. But anyway, which ultimately is still supported in a way. But anyway, returned to skinny. So men resent linear sexual attractive power over them. So, and in a way, sexual attraction does linearize. Specifically, there's stuff about that actually identifies the exact numericals of sexual attraction. I think one figure I remember is a 1 to 1.5, and sometimes in some cases a little more, some even more exacerbated, 1 to 2.0. But a waist to hip ratio of 1 to 1.5, at least at the bare minimum, to really cross this threshold of unbearably attractive. So waist to hip ratio, so for every 1 inch in the circumference, LOL, I studied math, but 1 inch for every 1 inch when you measure around your waist, when you go around, there's 1.5 inches around the hips. So, and some women have a build to have that structure. You aren't really fully skinny per se. You're healthier, attractive, but it isn't skinny per se. There's a linear increase in size to have that, the big ass and that sort of thing. And so men resent that it linearly is more attractive, which implies it has linearly more power over them. And if they're not internally defined, it's and masculine and grounded in their masculinity, they abhor that. It sets off all of the alarms. It sets off the threat to their masculinity. So what do? They say, well, that's fat actually, so that's gross, so therefore I'm not attracted to that. To ameliorate, essentially, they resent how much power of attraction that has over them, that they try to say, well, actually, they try to rationalize, that's not attractive to me in the first place. And the verbiage they use for that is, well, that's fat. Fat is synonymous with unattractive, essentially. So they do return to skinny. So they say, get skinnier. Now, there's a secondary element to that that's a little bit deeper, and that is that bigness also emulates power. And so they resent that linear attractiveness of that sexuality, but they also resent bigness comparative to them if they feel small, especially because most of these guys saying this aren't big. They don't feel big because they're not physically big from working out, and they also don't feel big, which transmutes or really transmuted from not feeling powerful for not exercising their agency through the gym or anything else of the like. And so return to skinny also functions as I want smallness. I want smallness in a woman, especially because when you are physically small, the way our social abstract structures work is that we actually wind up, if somebody's physically small, we sort of treat them as smaller, and not always in a condescending way, just as in that, and they usually tend to embody that. People tend to embody how they're responded to. They tend to say, this is my role. We do have this mammal mandate to, in a way, listen to the group's role for us. And so smallness manifests as less power in that fashion. And this is evident in how there's demureness and smallness in the psychosocial rankings amongst people who are smaller. And this is why, in a way, people who are taller tend to rise to positions of structural and societal power, because we presume, our hunter-gatherer brains presume and confer that role upon them because they are bigger, more power, and therefore we almost project that they are more capable of wielding power, or they belong in positions of power. So, because they feel small from this, they want women's smallness. They want to linearly increase women's smallness to exacerbate the sensation that they are big. If the woman is smaller than them in every meaningful way, it exacerbates sensations of bigness. What does bigness transmute to? Power. What does power transmute to? That aforementioned masculinity. Now, what's the problem? The problem is that this is pathological. The problem is that this isn't pursuant to authentic masculinity, disciplined sensations of power and confidence. It is just endlessly projecting it outwards and doing this reconciliation, this rationalization that ultimately doesn't address the problem. You feel small not because someone else is big. You feel small because you are not behaving big. You feel powerless because you are not exercising power, not because others have power comparative to you. You can transcend I keep saying that word. I got to come up with another word. Over the weekend, I'll vocab max a little bit. And we're almost done here. I'll try to wrap this up, and then we'll open up the space in about maybe whenever I'm done here. I promise I'm getting close. So now there's a secondary, there was another part to that, but I forgot. But I'll just move on. And I'll say now, why are women, interestingly, getting into this? Why are women submitting to this? It's not just pick-me stuff. Women are lapping this up as well because it does exacerbate sensations of femininity to have smallness, to feel smaller. We want to feel masculine. We want to have masculinity. We want to have our balls. We want to be alpha. They want to be, maybe beta isn't the word, but they want to be women. They want to feel what it's like to be a woman. It's inscribed upon us to fulfill our gender roles and responsibilities, both interpersonally and psychologically, and in a more contextual, tangible role of society. So women are lapping this up to say, yeah, skinny. It also gives them a sensation of power over other women. Well, I'm more womanly than you. I'm more effeminate than you because I'm skinnier. I'm smaller. You're big. You're fat. You are valueless because you are necessarily less attractive. Ultimately, women, as much as they don't want to admit it, they feel their power most greatly through their sexuality, their sense of self, their sense of value most through their sexuality. And so women are lapping this up, especially because it provides them the convenient excuse to not go to the gym. Most women who are skinny, it's not because they do anything pursuant to their health and their fitness. They just don't pig out. And they don't pig out, not even out of any valuation. They just don't pig out because they don't feel like pigging out. In some fashion, pigging out takes something to you. There's something to it. There's some kind of effort to it. But of course, the effort is not commensurate to the pleasure, and that's why it's still indulgent. The pleasure significantly outpaces the investment it would even take to be indulgent. So women lap this up as well by saying, yeah, skinny bitches are this, that, the other thing. And I thought of this in a tweet that some woman said, and my friend here, Based Mars, if you're watching, she sent me it because we always meme about how everyone's a big, fat, indulgent baby. She is one of the leading Frau Waffen generals on the classical cope theory. So it said, the most fertile girl you know is a size 0 and has an iced coffee for breakfast. That's just like straight up not even true, especially because the women with this coffee and caffeine problem, like they destroy their kidneys with this. And the size 0, no, actually, there's like more than enough evidence to show. I hate using evidence and all that, but you could just also rationalize as to what your signals are about this. What do the most famously attractive women on like Instagram or something like that look like? Are they like the scrawny, bony girls, the Victoria's Secret models? Does anyone even know who the Victoria's Secret models are anymore? They know exactly who the Instagram girl with the fat ass is, though. So what's the ultimate conclusion? And some of my friends will say, that's Jewish. That's Jewish psyop. It's like, for that to be a psyop, it still has to press a button. And if it's pressing, and if you're going to argue that only exclusively presses the visual button, it's like, okay, well, there's a visual stimulus to that anyway in the first place. And therefore, what is the visual signaling there? And the visual signaling is linearly higher attractiveness. And so women lap this up because they get to indulge and be skinny, but the skinny excuses them from getting more attractive, and they are lapping up this opportunity to be attractive without having to do anything pursuant to attractiveness. They're excused from getting a fat ass, essentially. So anyway, I have a ton more ideas, but I think I will wrap up our stream element a little bit here. So if you are in the video, if you are watching live and you have some thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, go right on ahead and hop into the space. I see on the space I have one listener here, one other listener, but he or she is not showing up as the actual person. It seems like the person's listening privately. So, and it seems to be there's a delay here, so I will actually stand by for just a moment here because yesterday my buddy told me that there is a delay in the stream and when I say things. By the time people hear the part where I say I'm about to wrap this up, we'll jump into the space here. I already ended it, ironically, so there's a delay. So I will check in here. Let's see if there's anything else I have to say or any other thoughts. Maybe just a quick one here. It's always funny that in the conversation about like age gap relationships, women are always sort of like tacitly admitting that they're insentient babies when they're 20 years old. What happened to I'm a big fucking bad strong bitch. I don't give a fucking fuck, and I'm a fucking bad bitch, and I have a strong independent fucking woman. And it's like, okay, so how are you so easily manipulated when you're a grown woman at 20 years old? What even would be the manipulation? I provide you safety in exchange for sex, I guess, or companionship, even. So, anyway, another interesting thought that I could say real quick in the meantime while we wait for people to enter the space is Pearl Davis tweeted, "The Groypers have really got to stop buying this narrative that women were tricked into being whores by the Jews. Women have the choice to marry their high school boyfriend at 18 or party at college. What do you think most women are rationally going to choose?" This actually, this is kind of long here, so I'll stop in the middle of this diatribe if somebody jumps into the space. We have these proposed solutions to the female question, to the relationship question, that amount to essentially the return to tradition. And the idea here essentially is that if we impose this upon women, we impose this upon coon brains, inevitably they will pursue it. They will stop with the promiscuity. They will get married young. They will stop getting sex or having sex before marriage, and therefore sex has not as much pull on, or they will more carefully decide as well who they married, and in more carefully deciding, they will evaluate maturity, compatibility in not the usual gay sense. So, but the Jews did it idea, this neglects that there was still a button or an instinct tapped into women with this. And in particular, it is not just the pleasure principle, but it is also penis envy, right? Women, I think I might have said that women, or maybe I was just saying this to my wife, but I'm like talking all day, going off about all these rationales and all of that. If nobody joins the space by the time I'm end with this, by the way, I'll end the stream. I'll also check, I think I have the super chats up. So let me just check if anybody sent something in here. Give me money. Give me money. If you're a loyal Marchese Maxer, give me money. Just kidding. Not actually, but anyway. So this return to tradition neglects that a value proposition of feelsies, impulse, and in particular, the ability to compete with men to ameliorate sensations of inferiority, sensations of powerlessness, aforementioned, regarding that they are more beholden to their feelings because those feelings function as a heuristic for their survival instinct. What's more, the internet and the proliferation of the internet provided this remarkable phenomenon that is women in the collective unconscious also agreed to encourage each other, to bulwark each other's superego guilt. So this is how you have this stuff about, body positivity and all of that. It essentially is everyone agreeing together, women, but also everyone really agreeing together to not shame each other, and not shaming each other and encouraging each other and rationalizing each other provides this secondary rationale that is that, well, I rationalize to myself, to my superego, that this is all bad and wrong. I look like a baby with my hands like this. My hands get cold. But also, there's sort of like this tacit, well, how do I deal with the potentiality of I'm just coping? And that is that, well, if other people enable or construct the same rationale to me, oh, well, therefore, there's the evidence that it's not just me being a classical cope theorist. So now, this return to tradition stuff, they really don't, like, what exactly is the thing? We're going to impose these laws? These laws, when the laws are externalized, now, granted, they do belong there, but we also have to provide the culture to it, specifically the value proposition. And ultimately, what we need to provide for this women issue, this promiscuity, and this not getting married young issue is an understanding fundamentally of the difference between pleasure and happiness. I wrote an article about this. I think I need to expand upon it much more. These were some of the early days of my article writing, and I didn't really elaborate all that fully, but perhaps it's better that way too. Just provide the thought provocation. Excuse me. the value proposition of happiness, joy, pleasure, and fulfillment are not the same thing as pleasure. And this is just evident in, if pleasure was the ultimate happiness, we would all just drug ourselves to death. We would all just die. We would all just do drugs all day. Why wouldn't we? If pleasure is the ultimate happiness, we solved that. We solved that, and we could all die happy doing drugs. So obviously, but we all sense that we want more than that. We all sense that there's some latent mandate for otherwise. So therefore, that's just one of the easiest heuristics to understand, that pleasure is not happiness. And amongst the rightoid-based epic fascist types, they actually have a problem with their understanding of this, because they presume that it's neurotransmitters. And they do say good stuff about sunlight and lifting and all of that. But really, the neurotransmitters aren't what make you happy with this. What makes you happy with this is that you are respecting yourself. You are confident. You are pursuing yourself, pursuing truth, disciplined, keeping your promises to yourself. That's the actual happiness embedded in that. And ultimately, how about we all just stop and think for a second and say, what the fuck else are we going to do? This is sort of like motivational now. This goes for everybody. What the fuck else is there to do? Then work out, read, try to podcast, whatever, write, try a degree, try a new job, do something cool, do something that's not even really pleasant per se. It's just what it is, and you just like it. It's funny because as I say that, my first thought is some guys who say, yeah, I like shooting. And it's like, no, you're just doing that because you need to feel powerful, which you don't feel for all of the usual. I've probably repeated all of these pathologies several times, but perhaps it's good because they're unmentioned and nobody really fully analyzes this stuff. So the mandate for everybody is pursue these things, because what the fuck else are you going to do? You're going to watch a TV show for the several billionth time. You're going to coom, you're going to masturbate, you're going to fucking watch porn for the 7 billionth time. Has that made you happy? Has that made life mean something to you? Is that all there is to do? Ironically, people will say, well, what you're proposing is boring and all that. And it's boring, why? Because it doesn't spike your neurons. How about, doesn't spiking your neurons get boring? Even in the absence of spiking, even in the rationalization that, it's not spiking your neurons as a consequence of the specific thing, but spiking your neurons as a consequence of novelty. How does novelty not get boring then? What are you going to do? Endlessly do some new thing? What does that do for you? How does that make you happy? That just makes you feel good. That is not good in and of itself. So your mandate, your responsibility, and as it relates to the relationship stuff, is to pursue joy and fulfillment irrespective of pleasure. That's ultimately how you arrive at happiness and fulfillment. And I was talking to an old mentor of mine, and actually, full disclosure, an old mentor of mine who was really a therapist that I went to. So one of the reasons I got the idea to be a therapist, or a base therapist, we'll say, is not only because early on I sensed that this was my domain, this interpersonal psychological stuff, but also I went to a therapist. I had a lot of issues that I had to resolve. And so I talk to him every once in a while, and so we bro out. And, that's the thing, too. You can, bro out. You can, have a based therapist. He was essentially a based therapist. And what we were talking about at some point was relationships and when you're actualized. And he said, and, I made this point, too, but he said it in this, a good parable, per se, or quote, per se. And he has said that when you're actualized, when you are resolve your pathology, and when you are in a place of peace with yourself and confidence and all of that, the relationship becomes much richer and authentic and loving, because the transaction is your existence and presence for her existence and presence. And as a matter of fact, women sort of latently pick up on this a lot of the time, and this is how you understand how the classic old school stuff and complaints about how they resent when a man doesn't get them flowers or something out of an authentic thought for them, or out of an authentic wanting to express affection for them, when it's some sort of expectation of transactionalism, and vice versa too. Men resent when women bestow affection upon them, but all pursuant to some transaction. The real transaction that makes it authentic and fulfilling and a rich and healthy and God presence, Holy Spirit presence of relationship is transacting your presence and existence for her presence and existence. And perhaps the greatest understanding of this model is think about people you're friends with. We don't have this problem with friends for whatever reason, because we're not just as vulnerable to friends as we are to the opposite sex. But think of this with friends. Do you want to hang out with your friends because they give something to you or provide some kind of favor or something? Or do you want to hang out with your friends because they're literally fucking awesome and hilarious and they meme and they're funny? So that's something to think about, is that in a way, it's not the same relationship in nature to your friends, but it is the same. It has the same actualization, that is presence for presence. You just like your friends. You just want to be friends with your friends and hang out with them because they're literally fucking funny and cool and epic and awesome, especially my friends. I miss a lot of them, actually. I miss our time in the military. I don't miss the military because that's a whole story that I've probably told, or I haven't told on camera yet, but I'll tell eventually. But I miss memeing out with those guys. So that's your frame of reference for what it means to authentically relate and have what the transaction ultimately arrives at. And when you have a presence for presence, you're never worried about giving more than you're getting. So, okay, I think I will wrap that up here. I only have one person listening in the space, but it is privately. So W to space listeners, anybody else who tuned in briefly when I wasn't looking. If you would like coaching or base therapy upon this stuff, head on over to marchesemethods.com. I do one-on-one coaching for $50 for an hour, but if you book 4 sessions in advance, we can do $120 for the 4 hours. So it is a discount of $20, which is 40%. A discount of 40% per session. If that seems like you're not quite sure that is what you need per se, you can head on over to my DMs or email me, marchesemethods@proton.me, for access to my Discord server for $5 a month, where you get unlimited texting, asking me questions and everything. And sometimes if we're really diving into it, that amounts to a voice call, completely free of additional charge. You can send a super chat. I have it in the descriptions. I don't think the descriptions show up in the X broadcast. So entropystream.live/Marchese Methods. I might just have to use another one because it's kind of like obscure, this platform. I'm sure there's more of a mainstream platform. So that is Marchese Daily, live on the air Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern time, unless, of course, that poll, enough people vote in it to suggest a different time. That would amount to either 7:30 a.m. or 8 a.m. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I